You're 20 miles off the coast of North Carolina. The date is June 30th, 1942. The water is black, an endless, rolling inkwell under a moonless sky. The USS Unicorn, a humble little subchaser that's seen better days, is cutting through the swells. Her crew is exhausted, their eyes raw from staring into the abyss, searching for a phantom. A German U-boat U-701 has been hunting in these waters, this very stretch of ocean that Americans casually call the graveyard of the Atlantic. And it's been a bloody slaughter. For the men on the Unicorn, this isn't some abstract war in a newsreel. They've seen the evidence. The oil slicks that spread for acres. The charred, splintered debris. The bodies. Always the bodies. The U-boat skippers, the aces of the deep, they called this the second happy time. A turkey shoot. They were picking off Allied shipping right on America's doorstep, so close to shore that sailors on burning tankers could sometimes see the glow of city lights. It was an insult. A brazen, arrogant punch to the jaw of a nation still scrambling to fight back. And the man commanding this particular phantom, Captain Lieutenant Horst Deegan, was one of the best. Cool, calculating, a master of the stealthy attack. He'd already sunk several ships. He was a ghost. Uncatchable. But on this night, the ghost was about to make a fatal mistake. A mistake born of that very arrogance. Because Deegan, confident and unseen, had decided to do something no U-boat commander in his right mind should ever do. He'd surfaced. Not to attack, not to run, but to breathe. To let his crew stretch their legs. To recharge his batteries under the cover of darkness, believing the American defenses were a joke. He didn't know an American pilot, a young man flying a rickety, Army Green training plane that the Navy had desperately pressed into service, was about to rewrite the rules of engagement. He didn't know that his sleek, modern war machine was seconds away from being sent to the bottom by what was essentially a flying jalopy. And he certainly didn't know that his sunken boat, resting silently on the seafloor, held a secret. A secret so dark, so personal to every man aboard, that it would change the way Washington saw the U-boat threat forever. This isn't just a story about sinking a submarine. This is a story about what we found when we went down there. This is the story of the day the U.S. Marines boarded a sunken U-boat and found the crew's secret suicide pills. To understand the sheer, gut-punching impact of what happened to U-701, you have to feel the desperation of those early months of 1942. America was reeling. Pearl Harbor was a fresh, open wound. And while the nation's eyes were fixed on the Pacific, a different kind of war arrived silently on the East Coast. It was a war of shadows, waged not by armies, but by individual hunters. The German U-boats. Operation Paukenschlag, Operation Drumbeat. The name itself sounds like a thunderclap, and that's exactly what it was. A shock attack. Picture this, Miami Beach, 1942. The hotels are lit up, a dazzling string of pearls along the coast. Tourists are dancing, drinking, living it up. A few miles offshore, a U-boat commander peers through his periscope. He can't believe his eyes. It's like shooting fish in a barrel. Freighters, tankers, they're all silhouetted against the glowing coastline. They're sailing with their lights on, for God's sake. It was arrogance of a different kind, an American arrogance, a belief that it can't happen here. But it did. Night after night, the Atlantic coast became a shooting gallery. The explosions would rumble, a distant, ominous thunder. Flames would light up the horizon. In the morning, the beaches would be coated in a sticky, black tar of oil, and the surf would deliver its grim cargo of wreckage and the dead. The U-boat crews, they felt invincible. They kept diaries, you know. They wrote home about the easy pickings. They called us amateurs. They'd sit on the surface at night, watching the carnage they'd created, smoking cigars, listening to American jazz on the radio. The utter gall of it. They were treating the war like a vacation. And what did America have to fight back with? Almost nothing. We had a handful of Coast Guard cutters, some slow, ill-equipped subchasers, and a Navy that was learning on the job. Our air cover was a pathetic joke. We were using blimps, for crying out loud. Slow, floating gas bags that a U-boat could dive under with plenty of time to spare. The Luftwaffe High Command, if they'd even bothered to think about it, would have laughed. They had it all figured out. Their U-boats were the pinnacle of naval engineering. Their commanders were knights of the deep. They were untouchable, but they underestimated one thing. They underestimated the American ability to improvise, to adapt, to take a tool that everyone else has written off and turn it into a weapon of destiny. And in this case, that tool was a plane that was already considered obsolete, flown by a man who was never supposed to be a combat pilot. The stage was set for one of the most ironic and devastating reversals of fortune in the entire war. So let's meet our players. On one side, you have Captain Lieutenant Horst Degen, 27 years old, a professional, calm, methodical, a graduate of the elite U-boat training schools. He commanded U-701, a Type I sea submarine, the workhorse of the Kriegsmarine. It was 220 feet of sleek, predatory efficiency. It could dive in under 30 seconds, carried 14 torpedoes, and had a crew of 44 highly trained men. They were a family, a sealed, metal world unto themselves. Degen was respected, even loved by his crew. He'd brought them through tight spots. He was confident, maybe too confident. On the other side, you have Harry J. Kane, First Lieutenant, United States Army Air Forces. Not a Navy man, an Army pilot, and he wasn't flying a sleek fighter. He was strapped into the cockpit of a Lockheed Hudson. Now, the Hudson was a decent enough plane, a light bomber and coastal patrol aircraft. But it was slow, it was ungainly, and by 1942, it was already being phased out in favor of more modern designs. It was the kind of plane you'd give to a second-line unit, a training command. It was not the kind of plane you'd send to hunt the lords of the deep. And Kane himself? He was part of the 396th Bombardment Squadron, based at what was then a tiny, makeshift airfield in North Carolina. These guys were the B team. They were flying patrols, sure, but it was mostly for show. A way to make the civilians feel a little safer. They'd fly out, scan the empty ocean, fly back. They rarely saw anything. The U-boats were ghosts. But Kane was different. He was a thinker, a tinkerer. While other pilots might have just gone through the motions, Kane was obsessed. He'd study the attack reports. He'd pester the intelligence officers. He knew the U-boats had to surface to recharge their batteries and ventilate the boat. That was their Achilles heel. The trick was finding them in the millions of square miles of open ocean. It was a needle in a haystack. He also knew the Hudson had one single potential advantage. It could carry depth charges. But the standard doctrine was useless. You had to fly low, slow, and straight to drop them accurately. It was a suicide run against a U-boat that could slam its deck gun into action and fill the sky with flak. The math didn't add up. So, Kane started to improvise. He and his crew worked out a new tactic. They wouldn't do a standard bombing run. They'd come in out of the sun, or better yet, out of the darkness. They'd fly so low their prop wash would churn the ocean surface. And they'd drop their depth charges not with a sophisticated sight, but with a stopwatch and a gut feeling. They were turning a clumsy patrol plane into a low-altitude skip bomber. It was crazy. It was unproven. And it was their only shot. For weeks, they practiced. They'd fly out over the empty water, Kane pushing the Hudson's airframe to its limits, his co-pilot white-knuckling the yoke, the crew in the back feeling their stomachs lurch as the plane skimmed the waves. They were perfecting a move that wasn't in any manual. They were making it up as they went along. And all the while, Horst Degen and U-701 were continuing their reign of terror. They'd sink a ship, disappear, then pop up 100 miles away to do it again. They were toying with the Americans. They felt the ocean belonged to them. Degen's confidence was about to reach its peak. And his peak was about to become his precipice. Because on the evening of June 30th, 1942, all the pieces were about to fall into place. Harry Kane was in the air on yet another long, boring patrol. And Horst Degen, feeling the stuffy, foul air inside his boat, the smell of diesel oil and sweat and months of canned food, decided it was time for a break. He gave the order. Surface. The ballast tanks blew, the boat rose from the depths, and the hatch clanged open. Fresh, cool, night air flooded in. His crew stumbled out onto the wet, steel deck, gulping it in, lighting cigarettes, looking up at the stars. They were invisible. They were safe. They were dead wrong. 1,000 feet above, lost in the darkness, Harry Kane's radio operator picked up a faint, fuzzy signal. A sighting report. A U-boat on the surface. And it was close. The hunt was on. Inside the Hudson, the atmosphere went from bored to electric in a heartbeat. It's one thing to practice. It's another thing to have the real prey in your sights. Kane banked the plane, following the coordinates. The crew was silent, the only sound the deafening roar of the twin engines. They were flying blind, navigating by dead reckoning and a prayer. Then the bombardier, peering through his plexiglass nose, saw it. A faint, phosphorescent glow on the black water. Awake. And then the silhouette. Long, low, and unmistakable. A U-boat. Target sighted. The words were calm, but the tension in the plane was a physical thing. You could taste it. It was metallic like fear. Deegan's lookouts, they were good. They heard it. The distant drone of engines. They shouted the alarm. On the deck of U-701, it was instant chaos. The cigarette butts were flicked into the sea. Men scrambled for the hatch. The gunners sprinted for the 20mm anti-aircraft gun on the Wintergarten, the platform behind the conning tower. They had seconds, maybe less. Deegan, standing in the conning tower, knew the drill. Crash dive. The alarm bell clanged through the boat, a harsh, urgent sound. Alarm! The diesels would shut down, the electric motors would engage, and the boat would begin to slip beneath the waves. In 30 seconds, they'd be gone. 30 seconds. But Harry Kane wasn't giving them 30 seconds. He shoved the control column forward. The Hudson's nose dropped. The engine screamed. They were going into a dive, a screaming, near-vertical attack run straight out of the dark. The airspeed needle climbed. The wind shrieked around the canopy. This was it. All the practice, all the theory, came down to this one insane moment. Down below, the German gunners were frantically trying to track them. Muzzle flashes lit up the deck. Tracers streaked up into the night, lazy and orange at first, then whipping past the cockpit with terrifying speed. Thump, thump, thump. Flak bursts started to pepper the sky around them. The Hudson shuddered from nearby concussions. This was the moment where the obsolete training plane either proved its worth or became a fireball. Kane held his course. He was flying so low now that the altimeter was practically reading 0. He could see the individual figures on the deck, the white faces looking up in terror. He was aiming not for the hull, but for the spot just ahead of the U-boat. His theory was to lay the depth charges in its path, like placing a minefield in seconds. Ready, now. The bombardier hit the release. 2 325-pound depth charges tumbled out of the bay. For a heart-stopping second, nothing happened. Then, 2 massive, simultaneous geysers of white water erupted on either side of the U-701's bow. The submarine was lifted bodily out of the water by the concussion, then slammed back down. They'd missed a direct hit, but they'd been close enough. The blast had wrecked the delicate pressure hull. Seawater was already pouring in through ruptured seams. The dive was fatally compromised. Inside U-701, it was a scene from a nightmare. The lights flickered and died, replaced by the emergency red battle lamps. Water was jetting into the control room. Men were shouting, stumbling in the darkness. The angle of the deck was already steepening. They were going down and they weren't coming back up. Deegan knew it was over. Abandoned ship. Abandoned ship. The Hudson circled back. Kane and his crew watched, stunned, as the U-boat, mortally wounded, slid beneath the waves in less than a minute. It left behind a swirling pool of oil, air bubbles, and debris. And men. Dozens of men, splashing in the cold, dark water, their war over. They had done it. A rickety army plane, flown by a pilot who wasn't supposed to be there, had just taken down one of the Kriegsmarine's best. The revenge of the jalopy was complete. But the story was only just beginning. Because U-701 was now sitting on the bottom. And it held secrets. Secrets that Washington needed to know. And to get them, they were going to send in a team of men who were just as crazy, just as improvisational as the pilot who put her there. They were going to send in the Marines. So there they were. 44 German sailors, treading water in the open ocean, waiting to be picked up. Horst Degen was among them. He would survive, become a POW. He had to live with the memory of that one fatal decision to surface. The arrogance that cost him his boat and the lives of many of his men. But down below, 130 feet down, the 701 rested on the sandy bottom. The tomb, a time capsule. And for the US Navy, it was an intelligence goldmine. This was a rare chance to get inside a modern U-boat, to study its technology, its codebooks, its secrets. But how? This was 1942. Deep-sea diving was in its infancy. It was incredibly dangerous. The water was cold, the currents were strong, and the boat itself was a death trap, lurking with potential booby traps, tangled wreckage, and drowned bodies. It was a mission that seemed impossible. A mission for fools or for heroes. And as it turned out, the Navy knew just the fools for the job. A handful of US Marines from the 1st Marine Aircraft Wing, who had exactly zero experience in submarine salvage. Their leader was a tough-as-nails sergeant who saw a problem not as an obstacle, but as a challenge to be solved with grit and guts. What they would find inside that sunken iron coffin would send a chill through the highest levels of Allied command. It wasn't a new Enigma machine. It wasn't a revolutionary torpedo. It was something far more personal, far more disturbing. It was a small, glass vial, tucked away in a sailor's pocket. And inside that vial was a tiny, amber-colored capsule. What was this secret suicide pill that every U-boat sailor carried? And what did its existence tell us about the men we were fighting? The answers were waiting, 130 feet down, in the cold and the dark. The Marines were coming, and their story is one of the most incredible and forgotten missions of the entire war. That's next. Don't go away. The news of U-701's sinking hit the intelligence offices in Washington like a lightning bolt. It wasn't just the victory, though God knows they needed a victory. It was the location. The water was only 130 feet deep. For the U-boat hunters of the Atlantic, that was practically shallow. Most kills happened in the abyssal depths, miles down, where recovery was a fantasy. But this was different. This was a chance to crack open the black box of German U-boat technology. Think about it. In 1942, we were still guessing about so much. How deep could they really dive? How fast were their new electric torpedoes? What kind of sonar were they using? And the codes? My God, the codes. If they could recover an Enigma machine, or the current codebooks, it could shorten the war by years. The British at Bletchley Park were breaking their backs trying to read the German signals. A fresh, intact cipher library from a frontline boat? It was the Holy Grail. But there was a problem. A big one. The Navy's deep-sea salvage experts were they were all somewhere else. In the Pacific, dealing with the aftermath of Pearl Harbor. In the Mediterranean, they were stretched thinner than a dime. The bureaucratic wheels began to turn, slow and grinding. Reports were filed. Meetings were held. And with every passing day, 701 sat on the bottom. Storms could scatter her. The Germans might even realize she was in a recoverable position and send a raiding party to destroy the wreck. Time was not a luxury they had. So, they did what America does best in a tight spot. They improvised. They looked around for whoever was crazy enough and close enough to try. And their eyes landed on the 1st Marine Aircraft Wing, stationed at Cherry Point, North Carolina. Now, you think, Marines? From an aircraft wing? What do they know about diving on sunken submarines? The answer was absolutely nothing. But they had a few things going for them. They were physically tough. They were disciplined. And they were led by a man who didn't understand the word can't. His name was Sergeant James K. O'Hara, a career Marine. In his late 20s, with a jaw like a granite cliff and eyes that had seen enough of the world to be unimpressed by any new brand of trouble. He wasn't a diver. He was an aviation mechanic. But when his commanding officer called him in and laid out the mission, O'Hara didn't blink. "Sergeant," the colonel said, "the Navy needs a few good men to go down and take a look at a U-boat. You in?" The mission was insane. They had no proper deep-sea diving gear. They had to borrow old, heavy, standard Navy diving dress. The big copper helmets and canvas suits that made you look like a monster from a black lagoon. They had one small salvage ship, the USS Penguin, to act as their mothership. They had a handful of men who had maybe done some recreational swimming. That was it. No schematics of the U-boat. No knowledge of its internal layout. They were going in blind, into a dark, cold, metal tomb that was filled with drowned men and God knows what. It was a suicide mission, but to O'Hara and the Marines he selected, it was just another job. A dirty, dangerous, terrifying job, but a job that had to be done. The day of the first dive dawned gray and choppy. The Penguin rode uneasily at anchor over the wreck site, its crew having used crude sonar and a lot of guesswork to mark the spot. The water was a cold, forbidding green. Below the surface, visibility was maybe 10 feet on a good day. Today was not a good day. Sergeant O'Hara was to be the first man down. They suited him up on the deck, a laborious process. The heavy canvas suit, the lead-weighted boots that felt like you were wearing anvils, the brass helmet that was screwed onto the corselet, sealing him in. It was claustrophobic. The world shrank to the 3 small glass portholes in front of him. The air hose and communication line, his literal lifelines, were checked and double-checked. He gave a thumbs up, a gesture that felt more confident than he was. The winch creaked, and he was lifted over the side and lowered into the water. The first shock was the cold. It seeped through the suit instantly. The second shock was the silence, broken only by the loud, rhythmic hiss of his own air coming through the hose. The third shock was the light or the lack of it. As he descended, the green water turned to emerald, then to a deep, dark jade, and finally to an impenetrable blackness. The light from the surface was just a faint, shimmering disk far above, and then it was gone. He was alone, suspended in a void, descending into a world of nothing. His weighted feet hit something solid. He'd reached the bottom. The communication phone crackled in his ear. "O'Hara, you on bottom? Over." "Yeah," he grunted, his voice echoing in the metal helmet. "I'm down. It's black as pitch down here. I can't see a damn thing. Start moving west. The wreck should be 30, 40 yards that direction." Easier said than done. Walking on the bottom in a 200-pound suit was like trying to run a marathon in quicksand. Every step was a monumental effort. He shuffled forward, his world limited to the small circle of murky water illuminated by the lamp on his helmet. Strange, distorted fish would appear out of the gloom, stare at this bizarre intruder, and dart away. The pressure was immense, a constant, squeezing weight on his entire body. Then he saw it. It wasn't a shape at first. It was a darkness that was deeper than the surrounding darkness. A wall of black steel, covered in a shaggy coat of seaweed and barnacles, rising up out of the seabed and disappearing into the blackness above. It was colossal, menacing. Even in death, it radiated a sense of power and danger. U-701. He followed the curve of the hull, his hand brushing against the cold, slimy metal. He was looking for the conning tower, the access point. His light beam danced across the steel, revealing scars from depth charges, the ghostly outlines of welded plates. And then he saw it. The open hatch. This was it. The front door. And it was wide open. A yawning, black rectangle leading down into the belly of the beast. It was the most inviting and terrifying thing he had ever seen. "I've found it," he said into the phone, his voice tight. "The hatch is open. I'm going in." There was a pause on the other end. Then a nervous, "Roger that, Sergeant. Proceed with caution." Caution? What a joke. There was no caution for this. He switched on the handheld lamp he'd brought, took a deep breath of the metallic-tasting air, and ducked his head inside. The inside of the submarine was a nightmare. His light beam cut a swath through water that was thick with suspended silt, oil, and other unidentifiable particles. It was like swimming through soup. Debris floated everywhere. Papers, books, clothing. All suspended in a ghostly, slow-motion dance. And then he saw the bodies. They were everywhere. Men frozen in their final moments. A young sailor slumped over a control panel. 2 others tangled together in a narrow passageway, as if they had been trying to help each other escape. Their faces were pale, waxy, their eyes open and staring into nothing. The cold water had preserved them in a grotesque parody of life. The silence was absolute, broken only by the bubbles from his own exhaust and the frantic beating of his own heart. This wasn't a machine. It was a crypt. A sealed, iron coffin with 44 occupants. O'Hara had to force down a surge of pure, primal terror. He had a job to do. He pushed forward, deeper into the wreck. His mission was clear. Find the radio room. Find the codebooks. Find the Enigma machine. He moved with agonizing slowness, his bulky suit constantly snagging on valves, levers, and the limbs of the dead. Every corner he turned, he expected, he didn't know what. A booby trap? A live German sailor who had somehow survived? It was a house of horrors. Finally, he found it. The radio room was a small, cramped space, filled with complex-looking equipment. The Enigma machine, if it was there, would be here. He began to search, his thick, gloved fingers fumbling with drawers and cabinets. He found logbooks, charts, personal letters. But no codebooks. No little typewriter-like machine. Frustration began to set in. Had they been destroyed? Carried off by the crew? His air was running low. He had to surface. The first foray into the tomb had yielded nothing but nightmares. But O'Hara wasn't a quitter. He'd be back. Over the next several days, the Marine team made dive after dive. They grew more accustomed to the grim routine. They learned the layout of the boat. They began to methodically search every compartment, from the torpedo room in the bow to the engine room in the stern. They recovered documents, technical manuals, and personal effects. But the intelligence prize, the big one, remained elusive. It was on one of these later dives, conducted by another Marine, Corporal John Jack Riley, that the real secret was found. Riley was searching the bunks in the petty officer's quarters, a cramped space with 3-tiered bunks. He was going through the personal lockers, looking for diaries, anything of intelligence value. In the locker of a Oberstürman, a senior coxswain, he found a small, waterproof pouch. Inside the pouch was a curious item, a small, delicate glass vial sealed with a wax stopper. And inside the vial was a single, amber-colored capsule. Riley held it up to his faceplate. It looked like a medicine capsule, but there was no label, no identification. It was too deliberate, too carefully packaged to be ordinary medication. He tucked it into the recovery bag. It was odd, but in a boat filled with odd and terrible things, it didn't seem that important. He was wrong. When the diving team brought their hull back to the surface, the intelligence officers swarmed over it. The documents were sent off to be translated and analyzed. The personal effects were cataloged. And the little glass vial with its mysterious capsule was set aside with the other, more mundane medical supplies they'd recovered. A curiosity, nothing more. But one of the intelligence officers, a young lieutenant named Cohen who spoke fluent German and had a mind like a steel trap, wasn't so sure. He'd been reading the translated diaries and letters from the crew. There were hints, dark hints, talk of not wanting to be taken prisoner, talk of a way out. A final option. At first, they thought it was just bravado, the kind of grim talk you'd expect from men in a dangerous service. But then Lieutenant Cohen found a specific reference. In a letter from one sailor to his brother, he'd written, "If it ever comes to it, the captain has given us all we need to avoid the shame of capture. A quick end is better than a lifetime in a Siberian camp." Siberian camp? That was for the Russian front. These men were fighting in the Atlantic. The comment didn't make sense unless the quick end was something universal, something every man carried. Cohen's eyes went back to that little glass vial. He had it sent to the Naval Medical Laboratory for analysis. He didn't know what he was expecting. A fast-acting poison, maybe? Cyanide. That was the classic spy suicide pill. The results that came back a week later were worse. Far worse. The chemists identified the compound as potassium cyanide, yes, but it was in a highly concentrated, rapid-release form. One bite, one crunch between the teeth, and death would be virtually instantaneous. This wasn't just a tool for spies. This was standard issue, meant for every single U-boat sailor. The implication was staggering. The Nazi high command had so little faith in the courage of their own men, they expected them to kill themselves rather than be captured. Or worse, they had so demonized the Allies, painting them as brutal subhumans, that their sailors genuinely believed suicide was a preferable fate. It was a chilling insight into the psychology of the enemy. This wasn't just about winning battles. This was a fight against a fanatical, ideological death cult. The discovery of the suicide pill changed everything. It told a story that went beyond technology and tactics. It was a story of desperation and control. But the mystery of U-701 wasn't over yet, because they still hadn't found the Enigma machine. And the reason why would reveal a final, breathtaking act of defiance from Captain Lieutenant Horst Degen, an act that happened in the final, chaotic seconds before his boat plunged to the bottom. What last, desperate order did Degen give? And how did it foil the Allies' greatest intelligence hope? The final chapter of the U-701 is next. Back on the deck of the USS Penguin, the mood was a cocktail of triumph and frustration. The Marines, exhausted and chilled to the bone, had pulled off a miracle. They had entered a sunken U-boat, a feat many thought impossible with their ramshackle setup, and they had emerged with a treasure trove of stuff. Logbooks, charts, technical manuals for the diesel engines, personal letters, diaries. It was all valuable, no doubt. The intelligence boys in their crisp uniforms would have a field day. But for Sergeant O'Hara, sitting on a crate and sipping a scalding mug of coffee, something didn't sit right. The big prize, the one they'd risked their necks for, was missing. The Enigma machine. The codebooks. The stuff that could win the war. He replayed the dives in his mind. The radio room had been thoroughly picked over. The captain's tiny cabin had been searched, his desk drawers forced open. The control room was a jumble of equipment, but no little typewriter with rotors. It was as if the most important thing on the entire boat had simply vanished. The official theory starting to circulate among the intelligence officers was simple. Degen had destroyed it. Standard procedure. When a U-boat was doomed, the crew was under strict orders to throw the Enigma and its associated codebooks, weighted, into the sea. It made sense. It was the most logical explanation. But O'Hara was a man who dealt in physical reality. He was a mechanic. He understood how things worked, how they fit together. And a few things nagged at him. The open hatch, for one. If you're going to scuttle your boat and destroy sensitive material, you do it before you abandon ship. You don't just fling the Enigma out the hatch as you're scrambling for your life. The boat would have been in utter chaos, the pressure hull failing, water pouring in. The priority would be survival, not a meticulous disposal protocol. And then there were the bodies. So many of them were still inside. If the crew had had the time and presence of mind to properly destroy the Enigma, why were so many men trapped below? It didn't add up. It felt rushed, incomplete. Meanwhile, the discovery of the suicide pill was sending shockwaves through naval intelligence. Lieutenant Cohen's report landed on the desk of Admiral Edward Cochrane, a man who had seen everything in his long career. But this was different. He held the small glass vial up to the light, the amber capsule looking deceptively innocent inside. "They're issuing these to every sailor?" he asked, his voice low and gravelly. "It appears so, sir," Cohen replied. "We've found references in multiple personal diaries. It's not just for the officers. It's for the cook, the radio man, the engine room mechanics. Everyone." The Admiral set the vial down on his polished mahogany desk with a soft click. It was a sound that carried more weight than a cannon blast. This wasn't just a weapon of war. It was a tool of psychological warfare, turned inward. The Nazi regime was so terrified of its own men breaking under interrogation, or worse, realizing the lies they'd been fed and defecting, that they preemptively offered them the hero's way out. It was a level of control that was both brilliant and utterly monstrous. It painted a new picture of the enemy. They weren't just professional soldiers. They were fanatics, or were being forced to become fanatics. A man who believes he has nothing to lose, not even his own life, is the most dangerous opponent imaginable. The Admiral knew this changed the calculus of the entire U-boat war. Capturing a boat intact wasn't just about intelligence anymore. It was about breaking a myth, about showing these men that the world outside the Reich was not the barbaric place they'd been told. And that brought him back to you, 701. The Enigma was still missing. The Marines' mission, brave as it was only a partial success. The ghost of Horst Degen still had secrets. Horst Degen sat in a sterile interrogation room at a POW camp in Arizona. The desert heat was a world away from the cold Atlantic depths. He was treated correctly, in accordance with the Geneva Convention, but the isolation and the uncertainty were a new kind of torment. He'd heard the whispers from other prisoners. The Americans had salvaged you, 701. They had been inside his boat. The thought was profoundly violating. His command, his home, had been picked apart by the enemy. The man who sat across from him wasn't a brute. He was Captain John L. Prescott, U.S. Navy Intelligence. He was polite, spoke fluent German, and had the calm, patient demeanor of a university professor. He offered Degen a cigarette. Degen accepted. The two men smoked in silence for a moment, the smoke curling in the slatted sunlight from the window. "You ran a tight ship, Captain Lieutenant," Prescott began, his tone conversational. "Your crew was well disciplined. The boat was clean, up until the end. A credit to your command." Degen gave a slight, wary nod. He knew this game. Compliment the prisoner, put him at ease, then go for the throat. "We've recovered quite a few of your personal effects," Prescott continued, opening a folder. He slid a photograph across the table. It was a water-stained picture of a young woman, Degen's fiancée, Liesel. Seeing it here, in this place, was a physical blow. He kept his face a mask. "We are not barbarians, Herr Degen. We will ensure your personal items are returned to your family after the war." "Thank you," Degen said, his voice hoarse. "There are, however, some items we have not found," Prescott said, his eyes locking with Degen's. "The Enigma machine, the current Heimish, home waters, codebooks. Standard issue for a Type 7 on patrol in this theater. Their destruction is, of course, standard procedure. But your boat, the wreck is remarkably intact. It seems the destruction was haphazard." Degen took a long drag on his cigarette, buying time. His mind raced back to those final, chaotic seconds. The roar of incoming water, the shouts of his men, the desperate scramble for the hatch. Prescott changed tack. He didn't press on the Enigma. Instead, he opened a small, metal case and placed it on the table. Inside, nestled in cotton wool, was the glass vial with the amber capsule. "Do you recognize this, Herr Degen?" Degen's mask slipped. Just for a fraction of a second, but Prescott saw it. A flicker in the eyes. A tightening of the jaw. It was a look of recognition, and something else, shame. "It is a medical supply," Degen said, his voice carefully neutral. "Is it?" Prescott asked softly. "Our chemists tell a different story. Potassium cyanide. Highly concentrated. A very final kind of medicine." The room was silent. Degen stared at the capsule. He could feel the weight of it in his own pocket, the one he'd carried every day of his patrol. The totem pill. The death pill. It was an option, Degen said finally, his voice barely a whisper. For those who did not wish to fall into Bolshevik hands. "But you weren't fighting the Bolsheviks," Prescott countered, his voice still calm, but with an edge now. "You were sinking oil tankers off the coast of North Carolina. You were captured by Americans. Did you really believe we would torture you? Execute you?" Degen didn't answer. The propaganda films he'd seen, the speeches from the party officials, flashed through his mind. The Americans were gangsters, they were weak, they were led by a cripple and a Jew. They were incapable of honor. But the men who had pulled him from the water had been professional. The guards here were stern, but not cruel. The dissonance was painful. Prescott saw the conflict. He leaned forward. The order to destroy the Enigma, Herr Degen. Was it given? Degen looked away, out the window at the harsh, alien beauty of the desert. He saw the faces of his men, the ones who hadn't made it out. He saw his radio man, a boy named Klaus, just 19 years old. There was no time for a formal order, Degen said, the words coming out as a confession. The water, it came in too fast. I gave the order to abandon ship. I shouted it. That was all. And the Enigma? Prescott pressed gently. The radio room was already flooding, Deegan said, his shoulders slumping in defeat. The Oberfunkmeister, the chief radio man, he was a good man. A thorough man. He would have tried. But the boat was going down. The lights were out. It was chaos. He looked back at Prescott, his eyes bleak. I do not know if he succeeded. I only know I never saw him again. His body is probably still in there. And there it was. The truth. In the frantic, terrifying, final minute of U-701's life, the meticulous protocols of the Kriegsmarine had collapsed. The chief radio man had likely tried to smash the machine or throw the components overboard, but the onslaught of the ocean had been too swift, too overwhelming. The Enigma and its precious codebooks might still be inside the boat. They had just been looking in the wrong place. The report from Captain Prescott lit a fire under the salvage operation. They had a new lead. They hadn't been searching thoroughly enough in the radio room. The chief radio man, in his final moments, might have hidden the machine or its key parts in a last, desperate act to save them from the Americans, only to be overcome before he could complete his mission. Sergeant O'Hara and his team were sent down one last time. The weather was turning. The skies were gray, and the swell was picking up. This would be the final dive of the season. Maybe the final dive, period. O'Hara went down alone. The descent was now familiar, a journey into a cold, green hell. He entered the boat through the conning tower hatch, his light beam probing the familiar, grim corridors. He moved with a new purpose, heading straight for the radio room. This time, he searched not like a looter, but like a detective. He imagined himself as the chief radio man, a young man named Friedrich Hauser according to the crew manifest, hearing the order to abandon ship, knowing his most important duty was to protect the Reich's secrets. What would he do? He wouldn't have time to disassemble the whole machine. It was bolted to a table. He might try to smash the rotors, the most sensitive part. Or he might grab the codebooks and the machine itself and try to get them to the hatch. O'Hara began to search the path between the radio room and the conning tower ladder. He shifted debris with his clumsy gloves. He looked in corners they had ignored before. And then, under a collapsed locker, just outside the radio room door, his light glinted on something. Not a machine, but a book. It was a heavy, lead-weighted bag, designed to be thrown overboard. The canvas was torn, likely from the force of the explosion or the collapsing locker. Inside was a sodden, but largely intact, book. The cover was stamped with an eagle and a swastika, and the words Geheim Haltungsstufe, streng geheim. Classification level, top secret. It was the Heimish codebook for the North Atlantic sector. His heart hammered against his ribs. This was it. Hauser had been trying to get it out. He'd almost made it. O'Hara carefully placed the book in his recovery bag. He pushed further, searching for the machine itself. But it was nowhere to be found. The chief radio man had clearly been interrupted, likely by the final, catastrophic influx of water. O'Hara's air was running low. He had to surface. He had one of the prizes, but not the other. It was a bittersweet victory. As he turned to leave, his light beam passed over the body of a young sailor, curled in a fetal position near the base of the conning tower ladder. He was just a boy, and clutched in his hand wasn't a weapon or a tool. It was a small, waterlogged teddy bear. A good luck charm from home. In that moment, the war shrunk down to this one tragic image. The fanaticism of the suicide pill, and the simple human fear of a boy clinging to a stuffed animal. The two Germanys, trapped together in an iron coffin. O'Hara made his way back to the hatch and gave the signal to be pulled up. He broke the surface into a cold, driving rain. He was hauled onto the deck, exhausted, but he held the weighted bag aloft. "We got one," he shouted over the wind. They had the codebook. The Enigma itself remained lost, perhaps forever, buried under silt and debris inside the wreck. But the codebook was a monumental achievement. It would give Bletchley Park a crucial key, allowing them to read German naval signals for weeks, maybe months, to come. It would save countless Allied lives. The mission was over. The Marines had done the impossible. But as the Penguin turned for home, Sergeant O'Hara looked back at the churning water. He wasn't thinking about codes or machines. He was thinking about the boy with the teddy bear and the little glass vial they'd found. He thought about the terrible choice those men had been given and the arrogance of the leaders who had given it to them. The story of U-701 should have ended there. A sunken U-boat, a recovered codebook, a mystery partially solved. But history has a way of revealing its secrets slowly over decades. The wreck of U-701 was forgotten, left to the crabs and the currents. It wasn't until 1989, nearly 50 years later, that a team of civilian wreck divers, using advanced technology O'Hara and his men couldn't have dreamed of, rediscovered the submarine. They explored her with cameras, documenting her final resting place. And what they found in the radio room solved the last piece of the puzzle. There, nestled in the sediment, was the Enigma machine. It was corroded, covered in marine growth, but it was unmistakable. Chief Radioman Hauser had, in fact, tried to destroy it. One of the rotors was smashed, but he hadn't had time to throw it overboard. The machine had gone down with the ship, taking its final secrets with it. The discovery confirmed everything. Deegan's story, O'Hara's hunch, the sheer, chaotic terror of the boat's final minute. But it also raised a final, haunting question. The suicide pills. They were just the symptom of a deeper sickness, a fanaticism that would lead Germany to the brink of annihilation. How did the story of U-701 and its crew fit into the wider, terrifying narrative of the Third Reich's collapse? What happened to the men who survived? And what is this entire epic saga, from Harry Kane's desperate dive to the Marines' brave descent to the final discovery of the Enigma, tell us about the true cost of war and the enduring power of the human spirit, even in the face of certain death. The final, shocking conclusion is next. The war, of course, did not stop for U-701. It ground on a vast, consuming machine. But the ripples from that sinking and the subsequent salvage operation spread outwards, touching lives in ways both profound and mundane. For Harry J. Kane, the Army pilot who delivered the killing blow, there was no parade. He received the Distinguished Flying Cross for his actions, a notation in his service record, and the quiet knowledge that he had made a difference. He had taken an obsolete plane and a crazy idea and had turned it into a victory. He flew more missions, survived the war, and returned home to a nation that would never truly know his name. He was one of thousands of quiet professionals who did their job and asked for no glory. The arrogance of the U-boat crew, thinking themselves safe on the surface, had met its match in his ingenuity. He had proven that the American amateur could, with guts and brains, beat the German professional at his own game. For Sergeant James O'Hara and his team of marine divers, the mission was the defining moment of their war. They had stared into the abyss, quite literally, and had not flinched. They returned to their aircraft wing, their story a wild, barely believable tale told in the mess halls. They had been mechanics, turned into deep-sea explorers, turned into intelligence agents. The Navy, impressed despite itself, quietly adopted their improvised diving tactics for future salvage operations. They had written a new manual with their courage. And what of Horst Deegan? He spent the rest of the war in a POW camp, wrestling with his demons. The interrogation with Captain Prescott had cracked the facade of Nazi invincibility. He learned of the suicide pills discovery, a confirmation of the regime's deep-seated distrust of its own people. When the war ended, he returned to a shattered Germany, a nation grappling with the horrific legacy of the cause he had served. He had to live with the memory of the men he lost, and the knowledge that the secret weapon he and his crew carried was not a tool of heroism, but one of despair. The myth of the untouchable U-boat ace had been sunk twice, first by Kane's Hudson, and then by the grim reality of the Toten pill. But the most poignant stories belonged to the families. In a small town in the Ruhr Valley, the Hauser family received a telegram stating that their son, Friedrich, was vermissed, missing in action, presumed lost at sea. They clung to a fragile hope for years, imagining him in a prisoner of war camp, perhaps with amnesia. They never knew that he had died a hero in the eyes of his commanders, desperately trying to save his nation's secrets in the pitch-black, flooding interior of a steel tomb. They never knew that an American Marine had seen his body, or that his final act had almost succeeded. And in a small apartment in Bremen, Liesel, Horst Degen's fiancée, waited. She kept his photograph on her mantle. She heard the same official silence. It was only years after the war, through the slow, painful process of veterans connecting, that she learned the full story. She learned that the man she loved had survived, that he had been captured, that he had lived a long life. But by then, the world had changed, and their paths never crossed again. The war had stolen that future, as it had stolen so many others. So, what are we to make of this story? It's more than just a thrilling tale of combat and adventure. It's a lens through which we can see the entire nature of the war in the Atlantic. The discovery of the suicide pills was an intelligence coup that had nothing to do with technology. It was a psychological profile. It told the Allies that they were not fighting an enemy that played by the same rules. This was a regime that had invested its sailors not just with torpedoes and diesel fuel, but with the means for their own self-destruction. This was a new, terrifying level of ideological commitment. This knowledge fundamentally altered Allied tactics, particularly for the Office of Strategic Services, OSS, and the British SOE. If you managed to capture a U-boat, you weren't just securing a prize, you were engaging in a psychological rescue operation. You had to convince these men, often in the first few seconds of capture, that surrender was not a prelude to torture and execution, but a chance at life. The suicide pill made every boarding action a race against a trigger held in the mind of every German sailor.